Welcome to the Neophyte in the Woods podcast with Andrew McDowell.
Welcome to another episode of Neophyte in the Woods, a podcast and blog of outdoor exploration and a proud member of the Change Your POV network. Today I'm joined by my good friend and fellow Change Your POV show host, Jeff Adamec. Jeff hosts the show that leads directly into mine, Changing Hearts and Minds. Jeff is, also for the record, in my humble opinion, a legitimate badass and all-around great guy. Jeff served in the U.S. Army for 18 years. He began his service as a medic in the 82nd Airborne before moving to becoming a Ranger medic in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. In 1999, he was selected into the U.S. Army Special Forces and became a Green Beret Special Forces Weapons Non-Commissioned Officer. He has 6 combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan. Jeff was awarded the Silver Star, 4 Bronze Stars, an Army Commendation Medal with a V device for Valor and a Purple Heart. After 18 years active duty as a Sergeant First Class, Jeff was medically retired in 2013. He spends his limited free time doing veterans awareness and outreach through public speaking. Jeff lives in North Carolina with his wife of over 20 years and his 2 children. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. Hey, who's that guy you were just talking about, man?
I don't know. He's some badass that I met on the internet, and, I don't know.
You got to be careful who you meet. You got to be careful who you meet on the internet, man. There's a lot of people out there that'll catfish you.
Oh,
and
that
dude,
supermodel
that dude sounds
awesome. Left me? That's not real.
Supermodel? No, I mean that was me.
Oh, cool.
The worst case scenario is that it's not me. That supermodel that got after you was actually Bennett. So that would be the worst case scenario because you show up and it's Bennett. I mean, one person's going to be screwing the other one, and I don't think it's going to be you.
I don't know. I hear Bennett is a kind and gentle lover.
And he's got kind eyes. So
he does. He really does. Well, with that jackassery off the table, I figure maybe we can pivot into our topic for the day. Something I know that we're both excited about talking about, which is kind of a two-parter here. We're going to talk about the man, the myth, the legend, John Moses Browning, and the circumstances surrounding the greatest fighting pistol of all time. I'd like to, say sorry to the Glock fanboys. Bennett especially, I'm looking at you. If you haven't figured it out, we're going to talk about the 1911, the 45 caliber single stack service pistol. We're going to start off today with Jeff telling us a little bit about JMB and kind of the circumstances in which he grew up and why he became the greatest firearms designer of all time. Jeff, take her away.
Oh, yes, sir. Let me even go a step further with that beautiful introduction you gave about Mr. John Moses Browning. But when we started talking about the greatest, combat pistol of all time, if you thought of anything besides the 1911, you need to listen to this entire show 6-7 times and make sure you commit all of this stuff to memory so that you can be more informed and a better person. Because any other object, and yes, Bennett, we're talking to you. The Glock is really cool. My wife owns a Glock. But let's be honest. There is something to be said about the very first automatic pistol to be mass-produced still being one of the most popular handguns in the entire world and is almost relatively unchanged. All right, so John Moses Browning. John Moses Browning was born to a Mormon family in Utah. Now that right there off the bat, most people are going to be like, Mormon? Yeah, John Moses Browning was a Mormon, guys. He actually 100%, his family, meaning his father, his uncle, his mother, were all part of that original migration from the Mormons did from the east out to take over Utah back in the mid 1800s. JMB, as Andrew called him, began his gunsmithing career in his father's own gunsmithing workshop. His father owned a gun manufacturing workshop in Ogden, Utah, and that's where he learned all the standards and designing ideas and engineering and manufacturing as a basic job. He did all of that stuff as a child. He was encouraged by his father, who allowed him to work in there to experiment and try out new different things. And in a world that we live in, where we have our children are massively protected from the dangers of the world and not doing anything that's out of control, I want you to put yourself in the mindset of a mid 1800s young Mormon kid in the middle of Utah being told by his father, who makes guns for a living, go ahead, go out there and mess around and experiment.
Just
when you
blow
think about
yourself up.
yeah, he probably didn't even get that. He probably didn't even get that disclaimer, that caveat. He was probably told, hey, go out there and find out what you can do, find out what you can build, what you can design. And before we even go any further, I want to take that right there as a thought and a method of trying to get you people out there who have children out there who are maybe have creativity or you're learning something from them. Sometimes it's better if we just let them go. Look at what we've able to get, what Josh Browning was able to make out of his father.
Absolutely.
He was, so like I said, encouraged to experiment. Before long, he developed his very first rifle design and began manufacturing rifles on his own at a company that he had co-founded with his actual younger brother. So, Browning Firearms, although his father owned the shop and worked it, the actual first real company, named company that people could go to was actually John Moses Browning and his brother, who started out, and it was Browning Weapons Manufacturing. The first gun they came up with was this weapon called the Model 1885 single-shot rifle. It drew a lot of focus from the Winchester Repeating Arms Company rifles. Winchester actually saw the brilliance of the design and purchased the rights outright from them for $8,000. That created a lifelong relationship between John Browning and with Winchester Firearms. A lot of John Browning's weapons designs were taken by Winchester. He was paid a lot of money by Winchester to design certain firearms, and it was something that kept him employed and kept the money coming in for him and his family for years and years and years. And the benefit of that long term for John Moses Browning was, as any of us know, when you have the money and you don't have to worry about it, you can take chances and go out and try new things. I think a lot of our not that John Moses Browning wasn't the greatest arms manufacturer ever. He was. But I think that there's a lot of other arms manufacturers out there who had, if they had been given the same kind of benefits that John Moses Browning was able to manufacture on his own through his brilliance, his intelligence, and his business mindset, he created a perfect opportunity for him and his brother to sit down and design these things and to take chances, accept failure. I mean, for all of the great things that John Moses Browning did build and design, there was probably twice as many failures that he had out there. And as we go into this, up to and including the 45 1911, there was failures in the design and everything in that as he was designing stuff. Over the next multiple amounts of years, Browning turned out a series of successful designs in partnership with Winchester, including the Winchester 1887 lever-action rifle. Everyone's seen that. The 1897 pump-action shotgun, and the Remington Model 8 rifle, which is another one that is still in production today. The most famous and impactful design that Browning is responsible is the telescoping bolt, which is also known as the overhung bolt. Now, that's not a gun. I know that's not a gun. For those of you who aren't really gun nuts and you're just listening to this for the first time, building weapon systems is really not about designing a weapon as a whole. It's about designing some kind of an operating system or some kind of a function that weapon has that can be utilized over multiple different, weapon systems, over different genres and crossovers. The telescoping bolt, or the overhung bolt as they called it, was a design that was able to be manufactured and utilized in almost every single major successful American weapon and foreign weapon, because it is used in a lot of Soviet weapon systems. And that is something that you can't say enough about as being one of the most keys to his success. is this telescoping bolt. And what happens with the telescoping bolt is the bolt telescopes over, or it wraps around and past the breech end of the barrel. All right, so it actually goes past where the barrel and the breech are, so that it actually like almost locks into the barrel system. The feature reduces the required length of the weapon, which is what eventually led to the designs of submachine guns, and allows rifle designs to be balanced around the pistol grip in a way that gives pointability similar to a pistol in a rifle. All right, so you actually have point aim, point impact ability with that, rather than having something that is very separated and pieced together, and you lose a lot of standardized point aim, point impact. You get the same thing that you need to have in a pistol, which is a limited amount of having to design something to be able to reach out and touch someone. That front sight post idea that you have in a lot of guns. You have that design, allowed that mentality to be placed into the rifles and to the shotguns. And what that did in the long term was give an already very well placed aimed shot baseline inside of every single system that came out of Browning's shops.
That's a terrific summary of kind of Browning and where he came from and why he was so incredible. I just want to contextualize one thing that Jeff said before. We were talking about he sold one of his first rifle plans to Winchester for $8,000. $8,000 is a lot of money in 2017. But in 1885, I just did the quick inflation calculation. $8,000 in 1885 dollars is approximately $200,000 in 2017 dollars.
It's massive amounts of money. Massive amounts of money.
So it wasn't, oh yeah, this is cool. It was, here, let us give you a small fortune in 1885 dollars and keep it coming. And I think that just speaks to the absolute brilliance of Browning. He was doing that stuff from a very young age.
Right, and I mean, you could talk about being that this is the historical portion of it. You can talk about the effect of Browning over time, but let's talk about what he was doing at the time that he was doing it was so important. You have a guy who was a brilliant manufacturer who, during a time where we're having the manifest destiny and the very big giant push in the United States to seize the West. And so you've got a lot of conflict, a lot of need for people who aren't very smart to have weapons that really worked well. And what I mean, yes, guys, is cavalry army people who are, loaded with a lot of, forgive me for saying it, but for dumb hicks who just want a gun that works right, being led by really maniacal friggin' leadership, guys like, I don't know, Custer. And you need them to have weapon systems that are working really well. You also need to have the ability to sell and manufacture things in large quantities, because you're fighting an entire nation of American Indians, that at the time, right or wrong, we were trying to conquer and take over. So they needed to have some way of doing it. On top of all that, being in Utah, you have somebody who's in the area, can design things, get them manufactured, and get them out into the hands of the public, or if you're a certain kind of arms dealer, to get them out into the hands of the Native Americans and get them armed. So it was a perfect storm of time period to brilliance to having a country that was not afraid of weapon systems. There was a lot of pushing to build a better weapon, and everyone talks about the weapons that won the West and everything. And John Moses Browning was hands deep and knee deep in having everything to do with all of that stuff.
And that point about the cavalry is actually pretty well taken, and we'll talk about that more in a second. But the 1911 has, for those of you who don't know, two safeties on it, two external safeties on it. Has a thumb safety that you flick on and off with your thumb as you're coming up, but it also has a grip safety, and that was actually for a reason. In 2017, if somebody designed a weapon with two safeties, I think about like the Ruger SR9. It has a little chiclet thumb safety and also a trigger safety, kind of block style. It's the 1911 wasn't designed by a lawyer, like we'd say to a guy. It actually had those two safeties for a reason. If you're a cavalry trooper and you're charging across, let's say, a field, and you're on a horse and you're bouncing up and down, actuating that thumb safety might be a little bit difficult. So if you say loosen up on your grip a little bit so your grip safety isn't depressed anymore, you're not going to shoot your horse in the back of the head and become an infantryman like right off the bat before you even meet combat. He really thought about every little aspect of this gun, and that'll become a little bit more apparent as we're kind of talking about the platform broadly.
Right, right, and the thing, a lot of things that people don't realize is that, and then, like I said, we'll go into this more, but try to remember that John Moses Browning designed the 1911 around an already existing round that the military had already decided was going to be the weapon system, or the round it was going to use as a sidearm. All right, so the 45 ACP was not designed to fit the 1911. The 1911 was designed to fit that round. And that was one of the number one rules during the designing phase and the testing phase of the United States military's purchase of this weapon system, was that this weapon system that they purchased had to be able to utilize the 45 ACP. It had to. It's one of the few things that people don't know. And historically, it's very, very poignant that it wasn't a weapon system that was designed and this round is what fit it. It was a round, a cartridge that was made that had to fit, that the design had to fit to be able to operate.
It almost flips the script on how we design things these days. But
yes.
we will get to that in a second. I just want to talk about real quick kind of the roots of the 1911 and kind of where it had its kind of origins. If you're thinking about a family tree, obviously, Browning developing the overhung bolt is part of this whole story, and the a key part of it. But we actually really have to go back to the mid to late 1890s, where weapon designers were really looking for a way to improve the handgun. Revolver technology had pretty much gone as far as science and engineering at the time would let it go. So, tinkerers and innovators being tinkerers and innovators, they want to do the next new thing and really come up with something new and better. So they were really trying to bring this idea of the semi-automatic, that is to say, a self-loading pistol, to bring it into existence, and use it to replace those service revolvers that had been used for 100 or so years, since probably the early 1820s. So coming up on 80, 70, 80 years since the revolver really kind of was generated. And to even, look at this, we actually have to go back even a decade before, to look at Hiram Maxim. You'll recognize his name from the Maxim machine gun. He was another kind of great weapons innovator, an engineer. He had developed a self-loading rifle in the 1870s. So everybody knew this was technically possible on a larger scale. Maxim stopped innovating in the self-loading area after he developed his rifle to focus almost exclusively on machine guns.
Right. I mean, one thing that I think a lot of people, if they want to have an idea of where to go with it, is that the Mauser rifle is based a lot on Hiram Maxim's designs. But I agree wholeheartedly with you. Is Maxim's failure to be somebody that is more well known comes specifically from what you just said. He failed to continue to innovate. He was one of those guys that he came up with a good idea, everyone went with it, and then he just kind of held on to that old thing where, as much as you're going to hear us, grease the creases on Browning, one of the things that nobody can deny is that Browning continued to innovate in his lifetime and in his career far past where he could have stopped.
Absolutely. And you actually have a story. We can talk about it now or talk about it later, related to Browning and his development of the machine gun. I don't know if you want to interject here. That I thought was pretty cool.
So I was an 18 Bravo, which is a weapons sergeant. So I do have a lot of information that I've been taught about the history of weapon systems and how important they are. But this goes to the actual genius and the foresight of a man like John Moses Browning. One of the last things John Moses Browning designed was the M2 machine gun. Everybody knows the 50 caliber machine gun. It's been made famous by hundreds of military movies, as being placed inside the flying fortresses, or you see pictures of it up on top of a riverboat during Vietnam, or the dual machine guns that are being fired by guys in the movie. Or off the shoulders of anybody in any movie on World War II where they're shooting at Zeros flying by. But one thing what really struck me was the M2 machine gun. The original design of it is exactly the same, minus one thing, as the weapon system that we use today that is still in use. And having said that, the HB, which you'll hear people talk about, the M2 HB, the HB is just a heavy barrel. And the only thing that makes it an improvement was because, metal makers now have been able to make heavier barrels that can withstand a lot more heat, something that didn't exist for them back then. So you would have to change out the barrels, or you'd have to, only fire it at a certain rate back then. You can fire it at a higher rate for longer times, less changing out of the barrels on the commonplace. But because it is an improvement, they did change it from just called the M2 machine gun to the M2 HB. But everything else about the design that John Moses Browning made back when he designed it, which was, forgive me, I'll look it up here, but I want to say in the early 1900s, right a little bit right after the 1911 was designed. But it's so similar. And the weapon system is such a good and reliable weapon system that my 3 deployments where I was a M2 gunner on the top of a ground mobility vehicle in Special Forces, I had a weapon system up there, an M2 HB, that had the year 1941 stamped on it. That was the year it was manufactured. That same exact weapon system that was manufactured in 1941. The same exact weapon system, when we checked the serial number, had been flying in flying fortresses over Europe, was the same exact weapon system that I was firing in Afghanistan and Iraq between the years of 2001 and 2013. That is how impressive and durable and forward-looking his designs were. That his weapon system that he designed back then, other than a heavy barrel, was being used in every single major American conflict from World War II all the way up until recently, and it was the same exact gun that was created back in 1941.
I Googled it real quick. Browning designed the M2 in 1918, and it was produced starting in 1921.
I was so close. I was going to say 1917, but that. I mean, think about it. That's impressive. I mean, there's so many of them that are in the system that are those original designs. And it is such a just look at how much of our culture he's a part of. Yesterday, if you're listening to this show right now, 2 days ago you heard a show with Dwayne France on it called Headspace and Timing. Do you know where the phrase headspace and timing comes from? It comes from setting the headspace and the timing for the M2 machine gun using the go-no-go gauge that came with each weapon system. So John Moses Browning has incorporated himself into so much of the lexicons of all of our lives that so many people don't even know it. Every single person that sees a 1911 knows that they're looking at an automatic weapon. They have no idea that that's the first fully automatic, that's the first semi-automatic pistol ever designed for mass production. Is the same one that they're seeing now with next to no changes in it. And that's the brilliance of him as a designer, is he created something that was so simple but yet so effective that we've done nearly nothing to change it off of its original design. Yes, we come up with all these different improvements to make it more, snazzy and all these little, changes we can do to it. But the base operating system that exists is the same exact system that he designed.
A century ago. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. So, with that digression in mind, I think it kind of paints the picture of just how innovative and important this is. He took basically work that was done by, the Mauser company and Colt pistols and really brought it to the fore. So that's sort of the context of where the pistol came from. Well, let's talk now about why the Army decided. Sorry,
I was just going to ask you that because I was just saying to myself, he didn't think about it on it. He was handed a problem that he solved. This wasn't a problem that he knew existed, that he was working on. And that's another thing that I think is really great about his brilliance is the Army had an issue that they needed fixed, and he was handed that issue and was able to design something around it. But go ahead, man. I just wanted to say that it was definitely impressive that it wasn't something he had in the back of his head going on. Exactly. It was something that he was handed.
And that's exactly it. And we're going to throw a couple of dates at you in a second, and we'll do the math for you. But the time from getting the problem and solving the problem for a firearms designer, kind of working from blank paper, is extremely short and pretty impressive. So we have here kind of a situation. The U.S. Army was issuing a revolver, the Colt 1892, which was chambered in 35 long Colt, and it was effective to a point. Um, during the Manifest Destiny period, we were engaged in a lot of kind of colonial wars. Max Boot wrote a great book called The Savage Wars of Peace that talked about kind of these brush campaigns, if you will. And we had one of them called the Philippine-American War. It took place from 1896 to 1902. And I'm going to butcher the name of the group of people that we were fighting.
You want me to help you out with it?
Yes, I do.
It's the Tagalog insurgency. The Tagalog insurgency, the word Tagalog comes from the name of the actual language that the Philippine people speak. Those of you who are Special Forces guys out there listening to me, we all know about it because when we go to language school, the first time we see Tagalog, we're like, what the hell is Tagalog? And Tagalog is actually the language that is spoken in the Philippines, and it is the Tagalog insurgency because Tagalog also doesn't just refer to language, but also refers to a culture of people that are in the Philippines.
Thank you, sir, for the
You're welcome.
For the context there. So what servicemen coming back and reporting back to hire were telling them about the 1892 revolver was that it wasn't a sufficient man stopper. The Moro tribesmen, who are kind of a part of this broader culture, were part of the insurgency as well, and they had a, quote, high battle morale and used drugs to inhibit their perception of pain. So these guys were getting shot with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds and weren't dropping. With the actually,
to explain that, guys, it's not that they weren't being killed by these rounds. What happens when you talk about a man stopper round, you have velocity and all that weight and punch power and hit power that goes into the designs of these weapons. When you have, and this happens a lot with those guys, and you talk to a lot of servicemen, they'll explain to you this happens a lot with the 5.556 millimeter or 5.56 millimeter round that we use today, which a lot of you other guys know by a different name, if the civilian version of it. But when we shoot an M4 round at somebody, it's got such a high velocity and it's such a small round that many times the person who's being shot in the midst of a combat, when they've got their combat focus and their heart rate's up and everything's moving, they don't even know they've been shot. So it's not that you haven't killed the person with the round that you've shot them with, but in certain situations where you're combat focused and you're driven and you have fight or flight is going on and you're moving towards something, you could be hit with a round that if it doesn't feel like you've been hit with a round, you may not know you're dead already. And that was what was going on with these guys. They were getting hit with a smaller round that was designed to be smaller because it was in it was a sidearm for all intents and purposes. But when you have 2 or 3 seconds between you catching a sword or an axe in the head and shooting around, you cannot wait for that person to figure out that they've been dead. You need something that when it hits them feels like they've been hit with a baseball bat or a sledgehammer. And that was not being provided by the Colt, the 35 long Colt. It was just not providing that type of stopping power as we use today. And that's what stopping power means when you're speaking about it in this situation.
Thank you again for the context there.
Yes, sir.
So this is why I have Jeff around. He puts the science of combat to the theory that I can present here.
Man, I put the fun back in funeral, bro. I made killing fun again.
This is why you and Mike Penny are friends. So the Army actually went back in time to address this need. They actually started reissuing the Colt Single Action Army, the gun that won the West, because it was chambered in .45 and was a proven man stopper. But all that said, it was readily apparent that a new firearm incorporating a new cartridge was needed. So after the war, the chief of ordnance of the U.S. Army and a gentleman named Colonel John Thompson, who you'll recognize the last name Thompson as the having to do with the submachine gun, they both oversaw the procurement. And what's notable about the procurement is that it stipulated that the new pistol should not be, under any circumstances, less than .45 caliber and should be a semi-automatic.
And one of the reasons why they wanted to make sure it was not less than .45 caliber is because they knew that .45 caliber had a great stopping power, hands down. But we all know that .44 has great stopping power, and the main reason why is because of the Army had so many 45 ACP rounds in its inventory that it really just became more of a logistical simplicity to just go ahead and use the 45 ACP. It met what we needed it to do, and gosh darn it, we got a shit ton of them in our system.
With all that said, I guess we should probably talk about the re-entrance of our hero, John Moses Browning, and his partners now at Colt.
Yeah, so John Moses Browning had started working with Colt a couple years earlier, right? And while he was there, they got presented with this problem. Now, the military, the U.S. Army, was at the height of it starting to build its war machine, if you will. Worldwide, it was becoming a well-known power. We knew that America at the time, with Manifest Destiny and the spreading in the United States, there was a lot of money for the United States to be pushing around. So they got a lot of different countries and a lot of different weapons manufacturers. They got a lot of their attention when they came out with this, and they said, we need a semi-automatic round that could fire 45 ACP and could fit all of our specs. We are going to have trials. So John Moses Browning previously designed a pistol that met all the specs except for the caliber. He reworked the gun and Colt submitted and the platform in 1906. And so in 1906, him and Colt had submitted a weapon system that fit all of the stuff that was supposed to be on there except for the caliber, right? Browning was determined to try to reissue that gun. So he wanted to show it was the best. Decided he would personally supervise production of the new weapon. All right. Each pistol submitted for testing to the Ordnance Board was hand tuned and determined to be perfect before he released it to go to the testing board. The only problem was that it wasn't as good of a weapon system in that design, original 1906 design, as he needed it to be. So when it went out for the first set of trials, almost every single weapon that came in that first time failed to meet the standards the military put out, which was no big deal. This happens sometimes. It goes back. So John Moses Browning took the original operating system design around that, realizing that it wasn't going to fit the 45 ACP. He went back to the drawing board by himself and spent months designing one weapon system around this with the same kind of operational, it still was going to be short recoil operating weapon system as he had originally designed, but he needed to redesign it. The Ordnance Board decided to do torture tests on the pistols. Now, if you guys want to know what torture tests are, that is when you put the weapon system through the ringer as far as does this thing meet all the standards and can it, because at this point you've got it narrowed down generally to about 4 or 5 weapon systems coming from different places. The top 2 weapon systems at the time it wasn't called the 1911 at the time, but was Browning's design that he had pushed forward. And believe it or not, the other weapon system that was up at the top of the list was the German Luger. So I know a lot of people think, oh, German Luger wasn't that? Yes, the German Luger almost became the official weapon system of the United States Army sidearms. So they all got to this point where they're going to go through the torture test. So they went through all their prelims, everything went through, and it was about, I want to say it was less than a year from the time that the first call out to the cut and reissuing back to the companies, no, none of your stuff mixed, which was in the first couple months, to now it's been almost a year later. They've narrowed it down to these 6 weapon systems, and here's what they did. They took each weapon system, they fired it 100 times. They allowed it to cool. They fired another 100 rounds through it. They allowed it to cool. They repeated this over and over again. Every 1,000 rounds, they would stop, clean, and lubricate the weapon system. After they had done this for 6,000 rounds, it was test fired with deformed less than perfect ammo after that to make sure it still worked. Then after it still worked after that, which at this point you were narrowed down to just the Luger and just Browning's weapon, it was submerged in acid, run through sand and mud, and then went and fired again. It had to do all these things, all right? At that time, when they got done, the Ordnance Board decreed, and this is a quotation from them, of the 2 pistols, the board is of the opinion that the Colt is superior because it is more reliable, more enduring, more easily disassemblable when there are broken down parts to be replaced, and it is more accurate. So what happens after this with these boards, guys, is they don't just say, okay, now Colt has it. They send these weapon systems back. They allow the designers or the weapon things to address some of the issues they see, and then they bring them back. And it's not luck that did this for Browning, but I think it was just circumstantial. Because you're talking about 1911, you're getting real close now to a lot of stuff going on in Europe getting built up. If you guys know history, you know that World War I is right around the corner. Ruger or the Lugers never came back to the testing board after they were sent back. So they sent these weapon systems back with these things saying the Colt is superior. You have this amount of time to address any things and send them back to us. The Luger never sent any kind of improvements back to its system, and nobody knows why. There is absolutely no historical information as to why they made that decision. So on March 29th, 1911, the Colt pistol was selected as the official sidearm of the U.S. Armed Forces, and it was given the designation we know by it now, which was the Colt 1911, or better known by the U.S. Army, the Colt M1911.
And so those are the two dates that we were talking about before, 1906 to 1911. 5 years from inception to redesign to redesign to acceptance.
Right. And all of the hard work, all of the sit down and design stuff that went into it, all happened for John Moses Browning in just 1 year of that 5 years.
It's unbelievable. I mean, I can't think of a platform that gets adopted by the military that fast. And, you know, I've looked, you know, the M16, longer process than that. And, you know, a lot of starts and stops. I mean, probably the only one that was close was maybe the M1 Garand. I mean, it kind of interwar kind of rushed to adoption, but I think it's.
You know, I would even go as say that's a miss. It's not a miss. You're not wrong,
Yep.
but it's really easy at the time of a ramp up for a massive war like say World War II for you to fall through the cracks. The U.S. military needed so many different official weapon systems at that time that if it was something that they knew worked and it was reliable enough for them to be able to get their hands on it and for them to mass produce, they placed it in that thing. So I would even give it the Garand. I would not give it the same kind of credibility I gave the 1911, nor would I give the M1A1 or the M4 M1A1 that same kind of, because the M4A1 is just a carbine version of the assault rifle M16. So it was already something that was in the system that had been accepted, and they just reallocated the size and everything to be able to fit that. So the 1911 is in of itself such a unique design. Now, yes, there is something to be said about the fact that John Moses Browning had a relationship with the U.S. military and the U.S. government with designing weapons, but let's be honest, well-earned. Well-earned rapport with them, because he had constantly come out with new and better weapon systems. I mean, we're talking about the Browning automatic rifle, the BAR, the 850 shotgun. There's plenty of weapon systems that were designed by Browning that the military already used. So yes, he may have had an ongoing relationship, but this was a man that they could trust with designing a weapon that was going to work and was going to save lives. And the amount of effort and the amount of the time that he put into designing these weapons, it wasn't like nowadays. We have so many things that, yes, it works, it's great, so now we'll beta test it and we'll send it out. Can you imagine trying to tell a U.S. military, hey, why don't you beta test this? Go out and see if it works in combat and then come back to me with why it doesn't work? No, and they didn't have to do that with John Moses Browning, because this guy already was so reliable and so dedicated to putting out great products and great designs that they could almost blindly just trust him. And if you think about it, look at, as far as and you and I both know about our series on my show about, little moments that changed history. Mm-hmm. This is almost one of them. Can you imagine the impact on the U.S. military if the Luger was the sidearm of choice? And next thing you know, 5 years later, we're in a full-fledged world war against the company that actually is built and designed in, this weapon system is designed by the country we're at war with. We'd have had no sidearms.
And that's actually an interesting point. Browning obviously had a relationship with Fabrique Nationale in Belgium, and they produced 1911. So there are Nazi stamped 1911 pistols, not Browning high powers, actual 1911 style pistols. So, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where it just points both ways. I mean, could you imagine if, it was the other way? I mean, it would just be remarkable.
Oh, it's just one of those things that, it's the history around it is just, it's fantastically intriguing to realize how for such a small little decision as to Luger not sending back an answer to the stress tests that the weapons were put under, that he actually was able to take himself take a weapon system in such a small amount of time and design it over it, when the Luger had previously existed with 45 ACP as it was easily, he could have just said, I've made enough money.
Yeah.
But he didn't. He took challenges, and he went straight at the challenges and took them head on. And I want to talk about, if you'll indulge me a little bit, there are some things about the 1911 that a lot of people don't realize. One of the things that people nowadays always say about the 1911 is the fact that it must be fired from it's a single action.
Yep.
And we talk about the safety and the thumb safety and the flip up safety, the thumb safety, the grip safety. But here's something to consider. Browning intended for this weapon to be fired in condition 1. Now I'm going to go ahead and break it down Barney style for everybody. The Marine Corps specifically uses the conditions as a title for how a weapon system is supposed to be carried, especially with sidearms. So I'm going to explain to everyone what conditions 1, 2, and 3 are, which are the 3 conditions. Condition 3, when these are all designed around the 1911, guys, just so we can get that out of the way up front. Condition 3, chamber empty, hammer down, which means it requires a manual cycle of the slide before firing. That is considered condition 3. That is considered the way, and this is what the intent was. That is the way that the weapon is meant to be stored. It is not meant to be carried that way for use. That is just the way it's supposed to be stored. So condition 3, chamber empty, hammer down, requiring a manual cycle of the slide before firing. Condition 2, chambered, meaning round in the pipe. Hammer down, which means it's not cocked. The hammer is actually forward. The hammer needs to be cocked before firing. That is condition 2. Condition 2 is intended to be utilized as a transportation mode of it when you were on a range or during training. And then condition 1, which was the way that the weapon system was designed to be carried by actual active duty servicemen by Browning, cocked and locked as they called it, which means it was chambered, got one in the pipe going down, the hammer is locked to the rear, and the thumb safety is on. So it wasn't that it was unsafe. There was a thumb safety intended to be on, hammer down, weapon inside your holster on your side, and that was the intent by Browning for the way the weapon system was supposed to be carried. So a lot of people say, "Oh, well, this thing is so, it's dangerous with the hammer back and everything like that." That they forget that was the way the weapon system was supposed to be designed to be carried. And there was so many different ways that it was placed in that way for it to be safe inside of a holster without the trigger being exposed to the outside elements. You forget back then we didn't have these half holsters that had so much of the weapon system exposed or were slimmed down. This thing was completely holstered. It was almost the only thing you could grab was the handle when you were reaching down your holster to pull these weapons out.
And even then, I mean, we're talking about canvas or leather holsters with a flap covering the handle. So not only did you have to reach down, you had to pull it back up, undo a strap or loosen it, presumably if you're carrying it, and then, fill up the flap, bring the gun up, and then go into action. I mean, and even today, I mean, when I carry my 1911, which is less than I used to, because I have other choices now, but cocked, locked.
How dare you?
I'm a horrible person. I shoot it a lot though. Cocked, locked, in a nice leather holster on my hip because it's a gun that deserves to be shown off. It's my barbecue gun.
It is definitely it's almost like a piece of art in my opinion. When you look at a 1911, you're not only looking at the history of the U.S. military and the history of the United States and paying homage to a brilliant man like Browning, who, guys, let's be just completely clear and honest with this. Browning was not some kind of a war hawk or some kind of a warmonger. This man was a person who designed what is in effect nothing more than a tool to be used, a weapon system. And I want you hardcore liberals out there to listen to me because I am not a hardcore conservative person, but I am a gun supporter. I want you to understand this. This weapon, this sidearm, this gun, this firearm, this heater, or whatever other word you want to use, is nothing more than a tool. John Moses Browning never got wrapped around the axles as to whether or not he was designing something that his intent was to take lives. Its intent was to be utilized as a tool for a job that needed to be done. And if you look at weapon systems like that and take all of the stuff, all of the creepy, what does a weapon do to people? Yes, it kills them, but it only kills them when it is utilized. Mm-hmm. So I can blame the being fat on the spoon all I want, but the fact of the matter is the spoon did not make me fat. I still had to do the action that got me fat. And so that's me getting on my on top of my my crate and yelling at the skies about gun safety and gun laws, but it's just a tool. He designed it as a tool to be used. He designed a great tool to be used. He designed it safely, and his intent was for that, especially for that weapon system right there, was intended solely to be used by the military or as some kind of a defensive weapon system.
And that kind of brings us to, I think, the next point before we wind down. Since it was accepted by the military, this tool has been in constant use. Just like that, that M2, it's been in constant use in every single major conflict in which the United States or its allies, or in some cases its enemies, those Nazi stamped 1911s, have taken part. It's been World War I, global war on terror, and beyond. It's been there. And it hasn't been kind of a passive piece of hardware, right? I mean, it's a gun. It's designed to be used to kill.
Right.
And I think one of the more notable applications, we have two actually that I can immediately think of. In World War I, Alvin York used in 1911 to kill 6 Germans on 6 shots, and then take more than 100 Germans prisoner with his pistol.
1911 takes Germans prisoner. There you go. Boom.
There you go. And then the other are the two gentlemen who gave their lives during the battle in Mogadishu, defending the downed chopper pilot. At the end there, they ran through all their ammo and were fighting with their pistols.
Yes, they were.
So it's a tool that works, and that's another kind of point here, is that it's a tool that works so that people who need to depend on those, for example, nowadays, small units, Army Special Forces, Marines, some of the smaller kind of asymmetrical units are still issuing the pistols, even when even though it's no longer the official pistol of the armed forces. It's been in the 80s. It was unfortunately, I think, replaced by the Beretta in kind of a NATO political.
Yeah, the M92 Beretta did replace it for NATO and safety reasons. But Shugart and Gordon, who were the two special operations guys that you were talking about, they did utilize it. I did carry a 1911 for a short time during my time in special operations overseas. And Ed, you asked, and this is something I wrote down so that we could actually have it put out there. But if you want to ask anyone who knows a lot about guns what they like about the 1911, they're going to give you 5 answers. Number 1 is accuracy. Although it's not the most accurate weapon system sidearm that's ever been made, it is damn near close to it. And, in front sight post, that whole phrasing about front sight post was designed around the 1911. It has a light trigger. Again, not the most lightest trigger. It's also not so light that it's dangerous, but it has a light trigger. Slim design, and this is, I think, goes back to what you said. It's your barbecue gun. It's got it's a beautiful looking weapon system. It sits around the human body. It doesn't stick out. Like one of the arguments about the M92 Beretta was how fat it was in the hands of somebody. Even the Browning High Power, which was Browning's 9mm version of an automatic pistol, is kind of a fatter weapon system. It's customization. It is probably the most customizable handgun out there. It's got so many different ways to customize it all the way around that it's almost unstoppable. And then the final one is power. 45 ACP is one of the most powerful rounds in the world. That cartridge will put a man down and put him down. He has no question in his mind that he's been shot. Now, it is not without its faults. It does have a complicated takedown. It is one of the most, intensive takedown weapons ever. It's got so many different parts for something as small as a sidearm.
And that bushing on the front just sends that you take it off and you send your travel spring.
Oh yeah, it goes flying. And if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to be looking all over the place for it. And there's so many different springs in it that it can be quite complicated to take down. But with a little bit of practice and a little bit of training, not something you can't overcome. It only holds 8 rounds at max. So the magazine is designed initially to only hold 7 rounds, and then one inside the pipe. So it's only an 8-round weapon system. But those 8 rounds, every single one of them means something if they're on target.
Yep.
So then 200 to 300 break-in period. So you have to put about 200 to 300 rounds through it before it's actually broken in to be, working at its most optimal. So there, like I said, those are 3 downsides to it, but there's those 6 upsides to it. And on top of the fact that it's so damn reliable. Real quick before we wind down, just a little bit of the geeky breakdowns. It is a 45 ACP. 7-round magazine. The weight of the weapon system is 2.44 pounds with a length of 8.25 inches or 210 millimeters. It has a muzzle velocity of 825 feet per section with a short recoil operation. And the operation of the weapon system, when broken down, military style, it is a recoil-operated, closed-breech, single-action, semi-automatic gun with a twist rate of 16 inches per turn. That is awesome. And then to bring it all together in the end, this is how much respect it has. In March 18th of 2011, the state of Utah made the 1911 the official firearm of the state of Utah, which just fits because Browning was from Utah. And this was the weapon system that didn't put him on the map, but definitely solidified his place in history up there with guys like Kalashnikov, who Kalashnikov really came after Browning, and Kalashnikov himself even designed a lot of his stuff based on Browning's designs.
And, I think that brings it full circle, man. I think that's probably a good place to wrap this Bad Larry up. So thank you so much for taking the time to come out. Actually, behind the scenes here, this is the second time we're recording this podcast.
You said it, buddy. I didn't.
I know. I might have pressed record and only recorded the more important half of the conversation. That would be me. So we're this is take 2. I think that we've surpassed the banter and quality of that last one, if I'm recalling correctly.
No, I agree with you. I think this time around we've done a much better job of keeping it on target with what we were talking about.
Absolutely. And I just want to do one more thing. At the end of last one, we gave a shout out to Kimber. If they wanted to send us testing and evaluation pistols, I wanted a Pro Carry 2 in stainless. I don't remember which one you were looking for, but I was a big fan of the Kimber myself, the Springfield Armory one. But guys, for those of you who are out there, after you listen to this 1911 episode and you want to go out there and find a good company that manufactures the 1911 now, Springfield Armory, Colt, Wilson, Remington, Rock Island, and Kimber are my 6 that I choose for the top 6 manufacturers of modern day 1911. And so that way I'd go with their Springfield Armory or Kimber, especially Kimber if you want to send old Jeff Adamec the Special Forces version of the Kimber 1911, the one that's got the nice Special Forces insignia on the side. I would not kick you out of bed for eating crackers. I guarantee you that. I would add Smith & Wesson, being a Massachusetts guy. And my 1911 is a Smith & Wesson billboard series, so it's almost a performance center gun. So add Smith & Wesson to that list. You've got 7 quality, reputable firearms. So go support your American companies and get you the finest combat pistol of all time. Thanks for joining us again on Neophyte in the Woods. We hope you'll tune in again. Hey everyone, it's Andrew from Neophyte in the Woods. Just popping in real quick, wanting to do a quick kind of bumper out here. We here at Neophyte in the Woods and the Change Your POV Network do this all out of the goodness of our hearts. We legitimately love and are passionate about the subjects about which we speak. However, that doesn't mean that we're not absorbing some costs. And one of the ways we're trying to address the overhead costs associated with putting out these podcasts is to do Patreon. And you can find a link to it right down at the bottom in the kind of the episode show notes on our website. If you could donate anything that you're able to support us and help us get this content coming out to you, it would be very much appreciated. There are tiers of membership from $1 all the way up to $10, and you can donate more than that. For our backers, our Patreon patrons, we do offer some unique content. We've been doing weekly shows where we do a live stream and we talk about a quote on Mondays. It's normally right around 8 p.m. Eastern. There's also some other cool rewards, including the level at which I back at $10 a month. You can actually get, believe it or not, a signed autographed picture of our fearless leaders, Bennett and Eddie. It really changed my life. It sits actually right up above the computer where I record all this stuff. I take it with me when I go hunting. I take it with me when I go fishing. I take it with me when I go to work. It goes everywhere with me. Some people have an EDC pocket knife. I have an EDC picture of Bennett and Eddie. I would really strongly suggest you back us and keep the good work that we're doing coming. Thanks for listening. Thanks for supporting us on Patreon. Thanks for leaving us reviews on iTunes. And we'll talk to you next week.